Hello everybody and welcome to another Commander Tactics Deck Tech. My name's Pope. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Throne of Eldraine Buy a Box promo, the 5-color do-it-all Kenrith the Returned King. Kenrith brings with him a lot of activated abilities ready to support our causes or possibly even assist ones of our opponents. For 4 generic and 1 white, Kenrith is a 5/5 legendary human noble that reads, for a red, all creatures gain trample and haste until the end of turn. For 1 and a green, we can put a +1 counter on a target creature. For 2 and a white, we can give target player 5 life. For 3 and a blue, target player is going to draw a card. And for 4 and a black, we can put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. Kenrith has already been receiving a lot of attention for his combo capabilities that could make him a EDH level commander. But for our deck, we aren't going to be focusing on infinite mana or combos like that. Instead, we're going to be building a deck that I have labeled as Table Talk. This deck is a mix of group hug, conspiracy voting spells, and political spells forcing our opponents to make tough decisions. These in combination will lead to a lot of talking around the table and alliances being formed and broken in a matter of turns. If you've never played a group hug or political deck, they are an absolute blast. To make sure we don't catch any backlash though, we're going to be playing many spells to keep us protected and out of harm's way. And then, once our opponents have beaten each other down and forgotten about us, we're going to spring into action and snag a win. Our budget for this deck comes in at just under $150, but now let's kick things off taking a look at the group hug support spells we're going to be running, starting with our land support in Rites of Flourishing, Clear the Land, and Ghirapur Orrery. Rites of Flourishing is an enchantment for 2 and a green that says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player gets to draw an additional card. And each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. This card is an absolute staple in most group hug decks and can get things going very quickly. Clear the Land is a sorcery that says each player reveals the top 5 cards of his or her library and puts into play tapped all lands revealed this way, then removes the rest from the game. The first time I read this card, I thought it meant to remove all the other lands in play from the game, but in fact it just means remove from play the other cards that you revealed off the top 5. And Ghirapur Orrery for 4 mana, each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, they get to draw 3. If you're not familiar with the context of a group hug deck, the idea is that we are going to be supporting our opponents while also benefiting ourselves, and in return maybe they don't swing at us or worry about us until later in the game. Up next, we got 3 card draw spells that are going to help everyone around the table with Fevered Visions, Dictate of Krufix, and Minds Aglow. Fevered Visions is an enchantment for 1, a blue and a red. This is at the beginning of each player's end step, that player gets to draw a card. If that player is your opponent and has 4 or more cards in their hand, Fevered Visions is going to shock them for 2 damage. Dictate of Krufix, we can flash in on the end step before our turn, and it says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player gets to draw an additional card, so drawing 2 a turn. And then Minds Aglow for only 1 blue says starting with you, each player may pay any amount of mana. Each player draws X cards where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. Cards like Minds Aglow can really get the table talking and kind of turn things upside down depending on who will benefit the most. Also, I did want to make note here, these are not the only card draw spells we are running in the deck. This deck does have a lot of focus on card drawing because it is actually one of our win conditions that I'll be talking about later in the video. Next up, we've got 3 spells that are going to help give our opponents some tokens that we'll be able to abuse later on in the game. Sylvan Offering, Seed the Land, and Benevolent Offering. Sylvan Offering is a sorcery for X and a green that says choose an opponent, you and that player each create an XX green treefolk creature token, and then you choose another opponent and you and that player each create X11 green elf warrior creature tokens. I should make a point here that these offering spells that have you choose 2 opponents, they can be the same opponent. So you and one other person can each create an XX green treefolk and create X11s. They do not have to be different opponents for each selection. Seed the Land is an enchantment. This is whenever a land comes into play, its controller is going to put a 1/1 green snake into play. And Benevolent Offering says choose an opponent, you and that player each put 3 1/1 white spirit creatures into play, and choose an opponent, you gain 2 life for each creature you control, and that player gains 2 life for each creature he or she controls. While it might not seem too intuitive to be giving our opponents lots of creatures, the idea is that they won't be attacking us with them, and then later on, one of our other win conditions in this game is we might be borrowing those creatures. And then we have 3 creatures that are going to be helping support our opponents: Orzhov Advocus, Tempting Worm, and Heartwood Storyteller. Orzhov Advocus, for 2 and a white, we get a 1/4 that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2/+1 counters on a creature they control. But if they do, creatures that player control can't attack you or a planeswalker you control until your next turn. This is a super effective way to ensure we're not getting hit and making our opponents see that we are there to support them. Tempting Worm is one of the craziest spells you may have never seen. For 1 and a green, when Tempting Worm comes into play, each opponent may put any number of artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands from his or her hand into play. A little crazy and a whole lot dangerous, but this worm might buy us good favor with our opponents around the table depending on when we cast it and what they're able to play. And lastly, Heartwood Storyteller, a 2/3 for 1 and 2 green, says whenever a player plays a non-creature spell, each of that player's opponents may draw a card. And as mentioned previously, we definitely want our opponents to be drawing as many cards as possible. But now that we have helped our opponents get all set up and get moving quickly, let's take a look at the spells that we need to be playing to keep all of our board protected from harm's way, starting with the normal Pillow Fort setup of Sphere of Safety, Ghostly Prison, and Propaganda. Each of these enchantments are going to deny our opponents the ability to swing in and attack us, or at least make them pay for it. Sphere of Safety reads, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. And then Ghostly Prison and Propaganda are the exact same spell, but one's in blue and one's in white. It says creatures can't attack you unless their controllers pay 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. Each of these enchantments are going to cause our opponents to possibly redirect their attacks elsewhere unless they want to waste a lot of mana to do so. Next, we have 3 more spells that are going to convince our opponents that they don't want to be swinging at us, with Mystic Barrier, Bloodthirsty Blade, and Curse of Verbosity. Mystic Barrier says whenever it enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, choose left or right. Each player may attack only the opponent seated nearest to him in the last chosen direction and planeswalkers controlled by that player. Obviously, we're going to be choosing the direction of the threat that is not going to be able to attack us to keep us out of harm's way. Bloodthirsty Blade, one of the new equipments coming out of Commander 19 product that I'm a huge fan of, says equipped creature gets +2/+0 and is goaded. If you don't know what goad means, it means it attacks each combat if able and attacks a player other than you if able. For 1 mana, we can attach this to a target creature an opponent controls, and we can only activate this on any time we can cast a sorcery. If our opponent has big beaters, we can equip Bloodthirsty Blade to it to make it attack all of our other opponents, but also if our opponent has creatures that they don't want to be going into harm's way, we can equip Bloodthirsty Blade to it and force them to swing out. And Curse of Verbosity says, enchant a player. Whenever the enchanted player is attacked, draw a card. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. Card draw is a great incentive to not be attacking us, and we benefit off it at the same time. Then we got 3 creatures that are going to help keep our board state protected: Edric, Spymaster of Trest, Wall of Shards, and Baird, Steward of Argive. Edric, Spymaster of Trest says for 1, a green and a blue, we can play this legendary elf rogue, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. Again, incentive for our opponents to not be attacking us for that free card draw. Wall of Shards is a big defender flyer for 1 and a white with a 1/8 body that says cumulative upkeep and opponent gains a life. The way cumulative upkeep works is that at the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to put a counter on this, and for each counter, we are going to have to give an opponent 1 life. Getting through a 1/8 body is very difficult, but this also might buy us good favor with our opponents who we are able to help give them free life. And Baird, Steward of Argive, is basically a ghostly prison on a stick. It says creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. And then we have 3 removal spells that, while they are removal, that's not very friendly, so they do give something back to the person we're removing something from. Ablation, Chaos Warp, and Beast Within. Ablation says the owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into his or her library, but in return we are going to let them draw 2 cards. Chaos Warp for 2 and a red says the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then they reveal the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, they get to put it on the battlefield for free. and then Beast Within. We're going to destroy a target permanent, and in return, since we did destroy something, we're going to allow them to have a 3/3 green beast creature token. Now that we've seen how we're going to help everyone else get ahead, we've seen how we're going to keep ourselves protected, let's see how we actually close games out and secure the wins with this deck. Our first two win cons come in the form of Mob Rule and Reigns of Power. Each of these spells are going to let us borrow all of our opponent's creatures and use them against them. And since we've been loading up our opponent's sides with lots of 1/1 creatures, there should be no problem having a big army to swing out with. Mob Rule for 4, a red and a red, says choose one. Gain control of all creatures with power 4 or greater until the end of turn, untap them and they gain haste, or gain control of all creatures with power 3 or less until end of turn, untap them and they gain haste. And Reigns of Power says untap all creatures you control and all creatures and a target opponent controls. You and that opponent each gain control of all creatures the other controls until end of turn, and of course they all have haste until the end of turn. Both of these spells can be very situational and used to help close out games when need be. Our next win condition is a mill win condition using cards like Psychic Corrosion, Folio of Fancies, and Lab Maniac. Psychic Corrosion says whenever you draw a card, each opponent's going to mill the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. If we get Psychic Corrosion out pretty early, it is going to add up so fast depending on what additional spells we have online to help us draw a ton over and over. And then if we're able to get Folio of Fancies online with Psychic Corrosion, that is just a double whammy. Folio of Fancies for 1 and a blue is an artifact that says all players have no maximum hand size. For X and X, we can tap it and each player is going to draw X cards. And then for 2 and a blue, we can tap it, and each opponent is going to mill cards equal to the number of cards into their hand from their library. These 2 cards in conjunction can make our opponents have to draw a ton and then mill even more. And just in case our library starts to get to look a little weak, we can also play Lab Maniac, mill ourselves out, and win off of that. Our next way we can really close games out with this deck is with cards like Leyline of Anticipation, Plane-Wide Celebration, and Happily Ever After. Leyline of Anticipation isn't actually a piece we need to win with this win con, but it just helps facilitate things much easier. It reads, if Leyline of Anticipation is in your opening hand, then you can begin the game with it on the battlefield, and you may cast spells as though they had flash. That's what really helps to get this combo going, being able to cast them at flash speed. Plane-Wide Celebration Happily Ever After is a combo I featured in our $10 deck tech on Wednesday. If you haven't seen that, I'll link it down in the description below. Plane-Wide Celebration is a big sorcery for 5, a green that reads, choose 4, you may choose the same mode more than once, create a 2/2 citizen creature token that's all colors, that part's very relevant by the way, all colors, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, proliferate, or gain 4 life. This card by itself obviously not that exciting or a win con, but in conjunction with Happily Ever After, which reads, when Happily Ever After enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. This wacky win condition straight out of Throne of Eldraine has been getting a lot of attention around the Magic community, and I figure if we can just try to get it to go off, why shouldn't we give it a chance? And our final win condition for this deck comes in the form of 1 single card, and that is Storm Herd. For 8, a white and a white, we create X/1/1 white Pegasus creature tokens with flying, where X is our life total. As the game has been going on, our opponents have most likely been chipping at each other. If we cast this and we create 30 Pegasus creature tokens, then for only 1 red mana, we can use Kenrith's ability to give them all haste, swing out of nowhere, and kill our last opponents. All these different win conditions in this deck make it so fun and flexible depending on what is happening on the board, and whether it be using all of our opponent's creatures to kill them or creating an army of flying Pegasus, winning with this deck feels so good. But now that we've seen the nuts and bolts of this political machine, let's take a look at what else is inside the 99. We have a solid package of removal and control in this deck with 6 targeted removal and 3 board clears, but in conjunction with these we have a host of spells that are going to dissuade our opponents from attacking us and keep us out of harm's way. card draw in this deck is in full swing with about 11 to 12 different card draw effects and spells, as drawing cards in this deck is also one of our win conditions. Our ramp comes in the form of 4 mana rocks and 7 spells, and as a bonus, many of these spells are going to net us much more than just 1 land. And of course, to win with this deck, we have a handful of options. We can commandeer all of our opponent's creatures for big combat damage, we can mill everyone out at the table or win using Lab Maniac. We can use Happily Ever After and meet the many conditions on it to cheese out that nice easy win, or if all else fails, we can create a Pegasus army and fly over for big damage. But that will do it for this 5-color king. Kenrith is a super fun and flexible commander that can be the pilot for many different deck types. If you're considering a group hug deck or maybe all politics, I think Kenrith is the perfect fit. A quick thanks again to everyone who has enjoyed these deck techs and those of you who continue to like, share, and subscribe. If you're new to the channel and want to know when our next deck tech goes live, you can hit the subscribe button or be here every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. If you're on Twitter, you can head over and drop us a follow at EDH Tactics. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys for the next one.